It was one of those lazy Sunday afternoons where the air feels thick with quiet. The house was mine for a few hours. No TV, no clinking dishes, no Ethan shuffling papers in his office. Just me, the faint hum of the ceiling fan, and the soft scent of lavender from the polish I'd been using all morning. I moved through the living room like I always do, straightening cushions that no one but me notices are crooked, dusting corners that probably didn't need it, but gave me a strange sense of control. My hands eventually drifted to the bookshelf, our little museum of shared moments, novels bought on vacations, gifts for birthdays, the odd impulse buy from airport shops. I started pulling books down one by one, giving them a quick dust, flipping through a few pages just for the feel of it. My fingers landed on one of Ethan's newer ones, a sleek hardcover he'd picked up a couple of months ago. He'd made such a point of saying he couldn't wait to read it, but I hadn't seen it move from the shelf since. I told myself I'd just check the first few pages, nothing more. But the moment I cracked it open, something slipped out and fluttered to the floor like it was trying to escape. I bent down and picked it up. A small folded piece of paper, neatly creased, almost delicate. It wasn't a receipt or some scrap of notes like I expected. It was heavier somehow, the paper soft and worn at the edges. When I unfolded it, I saw handwriting. Looping, deliberate, and far too personal to be mine. To the man who stole my heart and keeps it beating. Forever yours, M. My hands went still. My pulse didn't. I read it again. And again. Each time, the words seemed to get louder in my head. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the page like it might rearrange itself into something harmless if I gave it time. But no. Those words were etched with certainty, each letter dripping with intimacy I hadn't felt from Ethan in longer than I wanted to admit. My mind snagged on that single initial, M. It was too deliberate, like the sender assumed Ethan would know exactly who it was. My chest felt tight, not from heartbreak, at least not yet, but from the sharp, icy awareness that something in my life had just shifted, and I couldn't unsee it. I closed the book slowly, slipping the note back between the pages as if I were tucking away something dangerous. The irony hit me, a love note hidden in a novel we'd both walked past 100 times. I placed it back on the shelf, my hands steady in a way they shouldn't have been. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I wasn't going to call him and ask. No, not yet. Asking meant tipping my hand. And if there was one thing I learned in my life, it's that you don't go into battle without knowing the terrain. The afternoon light spilled through the curtains, warm and golden, mocking me with its calm. I picked up the dust cloth again, pretending to clean, but my head was somewhere else entirely. The way Ethan's voice had sounded tired lately. The nights he came home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his. The vague, working late texts. All these moments I had brushed off now lined up neatly in my memory, forming a picture I didn't want to recognize. I didn't know who M was yet, but I knew this wasn't going to stay a mystery for long. I sank onto the couch, the fabric cool against my skin, and let the book sit on the coffee table in front of me. It looked innocent there, like it wasn't holding a grenade between its covers. My eyes kept darting back to it, my brain buzzing with 100 versions of what forever yours could mean. A slip from an old friend? No, that kind of tenderness doesn't belong to friendship. A joke? Impossible. Ethan doesn't do romance as a punchline. My gut told me the truth, even if my mouth wasn't ready to say it yet. I reached for my phone, instinctively tempted to scroll through his messages, but I stopped myself. This wasn't the time for a sloppy search that could leave digital footprints. If I was going to confirm what my heart already suspected, I had to be methodical. I pressed the phone back onto the table and instead walked to the window, pulling the curtain slightly to let more light in, as if brightness could help me think clearer. Somewhere out there, Ethan was going about his day, completely unaware that his little secret had just landed in my lap. My reflection in the glass caught my attention. I didn't look devastated. I looked alert. Sharper somehow. Maybe that was the surprise in all this, the absence of immediate heartbreak. This wasn't a scene from a melodrama where I collapse in tears. This was something quieter, colder, steadier. I wasn't going to scream or cry. I was going to find out exactly what I was dealing with. And when I did, I'd decide how the story would play out, on my terms. The days that followed felt different, like I was living in two versions of my life at once. On the surface, I kept the rhythm going. Work, errands, the casual, "How was your day?" exchanges with Ethan over dinner. But beneath it, there was this quiet hum in my mind, a constant replay of that note and the sharp loop of questions it sparked. I became hyper-aware of every small thing. The way he checked his phone before answering me, how his eyes flicked away when I asked simple questions, the scent of soap that wasn't ours lingering faintly on his shirt. I started combing through my mental archives, stitching together moments I'd dismissed. The emergency meetings that popped up late at night. The quick weekend work trips that didn't quite fit his usual schedule. The way his tone changed when he talked about a certain coworker, Marina. He'd mentioned her a few times, always with that careful casualness that almost dares you to notice. And now, with that letter signed M, the dots began to connect in a way I couldn't ignore. I didn't let my suspicion show. If anything, I played it warmer. Softer smiles, more questions about his day. Even leaning in when he told me the smallest stories. I wasn't doing it out of affection. I was studying him. Watching for patterns, the cracks in his rehearsed lines. It wasn't about catching him in the act anymore. It was about building the full picture, so that when the time came, I'd have every piece exactly where I wanted it. One afternoon, while Ethan was out, I let curiosity guide me through the house like a quiet shadow. I wasn't tearing through drawers or overturning furniture. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I moved with the same deliberate calm I'd used to set a dinner table. In his desk, I found a few crumpled receipts tucked beneath a stack of old bills. Dinners at restaurants we'd never visited together, dated on nights he'd claimed to be working late. The amounts weren't extravagant, but the details were intimate. 2 entrees, a shared dessert, a bottle of wine. I checked his laptop next, not to dig deep. I wasn't ready to risk leaving a trail, but to skim the surface. His recent browser history was wiped clean, which was almost worse than finding something incriminating. That kind of precaution doesn't come from habit. It comes from someone who has something to hide. And while I didn't get much from the screen, I did notice the way his email tabs were grouped, one always left open to his work account. It struck me as overly curated, like a stage set for anyone who might peek over his shoulder. Every small clue I found added another brushstroke to the picture I was painting in my mind. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun just yet. That would come. For now, I was collecting the whispers, the almosts, the nearly nothings that, when put together, would speak louder than any single confession. And with each piece I found, my resolve grew sharper. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was preparation. That night, I lay in bed beside Ethan, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. He looked peaceful, almost boyish in his sleep, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if I was imagining it all. But then I pictured that note again, the looping "forever yours," and the thought dissolved like sugar in hot tea. My mind drifted to Marina, the way her name always seemed to slip out of his mouth with a softness he didn't use for others. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to keep me awake longer than I wanted. In the darkness, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't confront him empty-handed. I wouldn't give him the chance to lie his way out of this or twist the story so I looked like the paranoid wife. If he was cheating, I'd have evidence so undeniable that even he wouldn't be able to spin it. My weapon wouldn't be rage. It would be precision. Quiet, steady, calculated. By the time the first hint of morning light filtered through the blinds, I had a plan forming. I knew who to call, where to start, and how to move without tipping him off. The game had begun, and I wasn't about to lose. I didn't have to think long about who could help me without asking too many questions. Claire, an old friend from college, worked at a cafe right across the street from Ethan's office. We hadn't spoken in a while, but the moment I called, her warm laugh spilled through the line like no time had passed. I didn't dive into the full story, just said I needed her eyes on something. She didn't hesitate. "Consider it done," she told me, her voice shifting into that no-nonsense tone she used when she meant business. Over the next few days, Claire's updates came in like breadcrumbs. Quick texts about seeing Ethan walking with someone. A blurry photo of the back of a woman's head. Long, dark hair spilling over a beige coat. And then, one afternoon, she sent the image that made my stomach flip. Ethan and Marina, sitting at an outdoor table, their heads tilted close, hands brushing like it was the most natural thing in the world. He was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, and not at me. Seeing it didn't make me cry. It made me certain. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't innocent. The note, the dinners, the late nights, all of it had been pointing here. And now I had proof. Real proof. The kind that couldn't be denied, no matter how skilled a liar tried to spin it. Once the first photo came, more followed. Claire seemed almost protective now, sending me everything without filter. Ethan leaning across the table to brush something from Marina's hair, their fingers laced together as they crossed the street, that lingering kiss by his car before she walked away. Each image was another nail in the coffin of whatever marriage I thought I had. And yet, with every new detail, I felt less like a grieving wife and more like a strategist collecting intel for a final, decisive move. I started a folder, nothing dramatic, just a neatly labeled one on a hidden drive. Inside, I placed the pictures, scans of the receipts, even a photo of the book with the note tucked inside. I made sure everything was dated, clean, and undeniable. If Ethan ever thought he could gaslight his way out of this, he'd be sorely mistaken. I wasn't going to give him a single inch to twist the truth. At night, I'd glance at that folder and feel the weight of it. Not the emotional weight, that had begun to dissolve, but the power it held. This wasn't about catching him anymore. It was about setting the stage so that when the curtain rose, every player in the room would see exactly who he really was. And when that day came, I wanted it to be unforgettable. A week later, Claire called instead of texting. Her voice was low, urgent, like she knew this was the final piece. "You might want to sit down for this," she said before sending the video. I pressed play, and there they were, Ethan and Marina, standing on the sidewalk outside a small bistro, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Then, without hesitation, he cupped her face and kissed her like it was a promise. Not a quick peck, not a mistake. A kiss that belonged to two people who had been crossing lines for a long time. I watched it twice, maybe 3 times, not to torture myself, but to study it. The ease in his body language, the way she leaned into him. There was no shame, no secrecy in that moment. Just two people sure of the lie they were living. And for the first time, I felt something dangerously close to relief. I didn't have to wonder anymore. The guessing game was over. I saved the video in my folder, labeling it Final Proof. Then I sat back in my chair, the edges of a plan sharpening in my mind. This wasn't going to end with a private confrontation in the kitchen. No. If Ethan wanted to play out his little romance in secret, I would end it in the brightest, most unforgettable spotlight I could find. And as it happened, the perfect opportunity was already on the calendar. Ethan had been talking about the networking event for weeks, dropping little reminders like breadcrumbs, the guest list, the menu. how important it was that our home looked just right. He made it sound like a celebration, a chance to impress his colleagues and his boss. I smiled and nodded through every detail, never letting him see the flicker of anticipation behind my eyes. He thought I was hosting for him. In truth, I was preparing the stage for me. The day of the event, I moved through the house with a calm, deliberate energy. Flowers in the vases, candles in the corners, glasses lined up in perfect rows. Every small touch was part of the show, and I wasn't talking about the networking. I even set the infamous book on a side table in the living room, its cover facing outward, as harmless as a family photo. Only I knew what was hiding between its pages. By the time guests began arriving, the air was warm with polite laughter and the scent of rosemary from the hors d'oeuvres. Ethan played the charming host, shaking hands, making introductions, weaving through the room with that easy confidence I used to admire. I stayed close enough to watch him, far enough that he couldn't read what was in my mind. Because tonight, the truth wasn't going to whisper from a folded piece of paper. Tonight, it was going to roar. It happened naturally, like the room itself leaned in to listen. A lull in conversation, glasses clinking softly, everyone gathered in small clusters. I stepped forward, my hand resting lightly on the book's spine. "If I could have your attention for just a moment," I said, my voice warm enough to keep them from suspecting what was coming. Faces turned toward me, curious, polite, waiting. Ethan, mid-laugh with a colleague, glanced over and smiled like he was proud of whatever gracious hosting he thought I was about to do. "I'd like to share something personal," I began, flipping open to the first page. A love note, the sweetest one I've ever read, in fact. Unfortunately, it wasn't written to me. The room shifted. A few raised brows, an awkward chuckle or two. Ethan's smile froze, just for a second. Then I read it aloud, each word of the dedication rolling off my tongue slow enough for everyone to absorb. "To the man who stole my heart and keeps it beating. Forever yours, M." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. I could feel eyes darting between Ethan and me, whispers beginning to thread through the group. I closed the book with a soft thud, then reached for my folder, pulling out a neatly printed photo. Ethan and Marina, hand in hand. I held it up just long enough for the nearest guests to see before passing it to the next. By the time it reached his boss, the murmur had turned into a ripple of disbelief. Ethan's voice cracked the silence, low at first, then sharper. "Laura, what are you doing?" But I didn't answer him. Not yet. I simply smiled, the kind of smile that says, "I know exactly what I'm doing." I let the photos circulate, let the truth make its slow, deliberate circuit through the room. His colleagues avoided his eyes, some shifting uncomfortably, others watching with a mix of pity and fascination. His boss lingered on the images a beat too long before handing them back, expression unreadable but heavy with judgment. When I finally met Ethan's gaze, his face was pale, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for a script he hadn't rehearsed. "It's not what it looks like," he started, but the line landed flat in the air between us. I tilted my head, almost as if I might humor him, then set the book down on the coffee table, right beside the untouched wine glasses. "You're right," I said evenly. "It's worse." A few gasps broke out, sharp and quiet, like the sound of glass cracking. I didn't raise my voice, didn't throw anything, didn't cry. I just stepped back, letting the weight of the moment crush him from every angle. The photos, the note, the audience. This wasn't a fight in private. This was exposure. And as the room buzzed with uneasy chatter, I turned toward the kitchen, knowing the damage was already done and the story was no longer his to control. The morning after the event, the house felt strangely hollow, like the echoes of last night's murmurs were still clinging to the walls. Ethan had left early, no doubt trying to salvage what was left of his reputation at work. I didn't ask where he was going, and he didn't offer. That suited me just fine. My coffee tasted richer than it had in weeks, the air lighter without the need to pretend. The confrontation wasn't just a release, it was a turning point. By Monday, I was sitting across from my lawyer, sliding the folder across his desk. He leafed through the photos and receipts in silence, his brows lifting slightly when he reached the dedication in the book. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is gold." It wasn't romantic gold, of course. It was leverage. The kind that could turn a messy separation into a clean, favorable split. I left his office with paperwork already in motion, each signature another nail sealing this chapter shut. News travels fast in offices, especially when humiliation is involved. By midweek, I'd heard from a mutual acquaintance that Ethan's affair was the main topic of whispered conversations near the coffee machine. Marina, it seemed, didn't have the stomach for the fallout. She'd ended things, leaving him not just exposed, but alone. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching the dominoes fall from a distance was satisfaction enough. The weeks that followed were quieter, but they carried a strange kind of energy, the kind you feel when you finally put down something heavy you've been carrying for too long. I started reclaiming the house, piece by piece. The bookshelf was the first to change. I pulled his novels down, boxed them up, and filled the empty spaces with titles I'd been meaning to read for years. The book with the note? I didn't burn it, like some dramatic gesture. I kept it. Proof, and a reminder that I would never again ignore the quiet signs. There were small freedoms I didn't expect. Cooking what I wanted without compromise. Playing my music in the mornings without headphones. Stretching across the whole bed without worrying about someone else's restless legs. These weren't grand acts of reinvention, but they felt like tiny rebellions, each one reclaiming a little more of me. And slowly, I realized I didn't miss Ethan. Not his voice, not his presence, not even the version of him I thought I loved. One Saturday, while sorting through a drawer, I found a photo of us from years ago, smiling, sunburned, holding hands on a beach. I looked at it for a long moment before tucking it away in an envelope marked "Past." That's where it belonged now. Not in a frame, not on the wall. Just another chapter I'd closed, filed away, and no longer needed to revisit. A month after the papers were signed, I found myself wandering through a little independent bookstore downtown. The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee, the kind of place where time feels slower, softer. I drifted between the aisles, running my fingers along the spines until I found one that pulled me in, a story about resilience, about starting over. It felt fitting. At the counter, the cashier asked if I wanted to leave a dedication inside, and without hesitation, I smiled and said yes. I took the pen and wrote in the neatest script I could manage. To the woman who finally turned the page. My own name beneath it. No initials to hide behind. No secrecy. Just a simple truth that belonged entirely to me. I closed the book and slid it into the paper bag, feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Not just freedom, but a quiet pride. Walking out into the cool afternoon air, I realized the story wasn't about Ethan at all anymore. It was about me, about finding the courage to stand in the light after years in someone else's shadow, and as the door shut behind me, I didn't look back. Some books, once you finish them, you know you'll never need to read again.